Good morning. Today is Monday, March 30, and it's great to welcome you to day 4 of our stay-at-home order. And hope you're enjoying the break, if that's what you're doing during this time. I know there's still a lot of people working, and there's a lot of parents that are dealing with kids at home and homeschooling kids, something you didn't plan to do. But I hope you're making the most of it and enjoying the Devos every morning and every evening, and that you enjoyed church yesterday. Thank you so much for joining us the way you are. It's a blessing to have you participating with us. Today I want to talk to you about where our fears take us. My friend John Parker is the pastor, lead pastor at Summit Church here in Orlando, and he wrote a blog a couple weeks ago, blog post I should say, and in it he used the metaphor that fear is like a car. It takes you somewhere. And I've been thinking about that since I read it, and it's true. You know, your fears take you places. And commonly, anxiety, fear, worry takes you one of two places. Some people, they deal with this by kind of going into denial. They just pretend like everything's normal, and they're afraid to face the realities of challenge and difficulties. And so there's a big part of our population, and maybe you fall in this category, where they're just afraid, and so they're going to pretend like nothing bad is happening, and just their schedule is like normal, and they are trying to spend like normal, and everything is normal. They're basically in denial. And the other direction, and this is probably more common, is that it takes you to desperation. It takes you into the future. Your brain starts going, okay, if this is happening, then this is going to happen, and then it's going to lead to this and this and this. And before you know it, you've gone from a 2-week stay-at-home order to the end of the world. And you keep making decisions about what's going to happen a month from now, what's going to happen 6 months from now, and what's going to happen a year from now. And things just keep piling on and getting worse and worse and worse. Some people always, their outlook is what's the best outcome that we could possibly have. They're optimistic about it. And others are, what's the worst possible thing that can happen? And, sometimes it's good to contemplate both. Let's protect against and insure against the worst possible things. But let's plan on at least something good coming out of where we are. It's curious to me that even way back in the time that the Bible was written, so probably as long as man has been alive, these tensions have existed for us. In Paul's setting, when he was writing to the church of Philippi, the same situation existed. Some people were in denial, acting like there's nothing bad happening, and others were in desperation, like this is going to overwhelm us, and I don't know where to go from there. In 2 Corinthians, a different letter that the apostle wrote, he uses a term talking about his own practice, and he says this, that he takes his thoughts captive. He arrests his thoughts. You know, it's really hard to stop thinking about something. If you tell yourself to stop thinking about it, then obviously you are thinking about it. So I don't know if it's impossible to stop, but I know it's really hard to force yourself to stop thinking about something. But what you can do is to begin thinking about something else. And I think that's what Paul was doing when he says he takes his thoughts captive. He arrests his thinking. And I think that's a healthy practice for us to do. In this season, when your thoughts start acting like a car and they're taking you to places of desperation or despair, or what's the worst possible thing that can happen, I don't know how this is going to end. And the truth is, there are some challenging days ahead for some people. Some people are walking through some really challenging days right now, even sickness. We have some people in our church that are dealing with COVID right now, and a few, and some who are fearing that. And these fears are real, and the outcomes could be very serious unto death. And so this is something to be concerned about. So I don't want to make light of that. At the same time, it's not a time to go to desperation. It's a time to arrest our thoughts and to deal with current reality, with exactly what's going on now and what can we manage, what are the things that I can manage today and the things that I can't manage. I can't make decisions for tomorrow. I have to make decisions for today. But it's also important not to deny that these are challenging times, that we pray for God's grace to be extended, especially to those who are in the greatest need, some who are facing challenges of work and finances, and some who are facing challenges of health and the fear of health issues. And I want to encourage you to do like Paul said in 2 Corinthians and take your thoughts captive. And then in Philippians chapter 4, Paul kind of explains how he does this. In chapter 4, verse 8, Paul gives his readers a list of things that he thinks about when he wants to take his thoughts captive. When he wants to arrest his thinking and stop what he's thinking about, he turns his attention to other things. And here's what it says in Philippians 4, verse 8. It says, "Finally, brothers, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is commendable, if there is any excellence, if there is anything worthy of praise, think about these things." You see the list of things he's thinking about? I like the way Eugene Peterson writes it in the Message. He says this, "Summing it all up, friends, I say you'll do best by filling your minds and meditating on things true, noble, reputable, authentic, compelling, gracious, the best, not the worst, the beautiful, not the ugly, things to praise, not to curse." That's a great list that Paul gives us. And so instead of your thoughts taking you to places where you don't need to go, I want to encourage you to think about these things. Think about the noble, reputable, authentic, compelling, gracious, beautiful, things to praise, the things that are best. That's the list that Paul gives us. One of the most interesting aspects of what we're going through right now for me is the humor that's being used on social media. My friend Ken Davis says humor is a gentle way to acknowledge human frailty. He also says that if you can't laugh, it's probably because you're taking yourself too seriously and not taking God seriously enough. That God gives us joy, and one of the ways people cope with the oppressive nature of what we're dealing with is through humor, and I'm sure you're finding the same thing. I saw this morning actually yesterday morning in the Sentinel, I saw an article about humor and how it's being used these days, and it had a picture of, believe it or not, the First Baptist Church in America, which is in Providence, Rhode Island, and they had their church sign in their front lawn in that church says this, "We had not planned on giving up quite this much for Lent." Again, humor, finding humor in a very challenging situation. I think it's one of the ways that we take our thoughts captive, that we keep ourselves from being so oppressed by the situation, is to arrest our thinking, take it captive, and let it take us to a better place. One of the ways, actually two of the ways the psalmist did this, he would take his thoughts captive in places of fear where he was facing what might be a dark season or something difficult that he wasn't sure what the outcome would be. One thing he would do, he'd remind himself of the way God had met his needs in the past. And one of the healthy ways to kind of arrest your thinking when you're being overwhelmed with negative thoughts is to remind yourself how God has shown himself and met your needs in the past. Maybe needs that you've had previously, or maybe somebody in your family or a close friend, and you've watched God sustain them in times of trouble, or sustain yourself in times of trouble. It's another time to say, hey, if he did it then, he can do it again. I know in my own life I've seen God in challenging circumstances to meet my need, and find on the backside, as I look back on how that situation unfolded, that God's was very gracious. There were difficulties for sure and challenges that I would not have chosen, and yet I had the sustaining power of God's grace in the midst of that. And knowing that He carried me then helps me have confidence that He'll carry me now. The second thing the psalmist does commonly in the seasons of darkness is to remind himself or give himself an eternal perspective. When we think about eternity and we think about the assurance of eternity, it has a calming effect on our lives. And it's true, sometimes it's easier to live in eternity than it is today. Sometimes the prayer is, God, I can make it in eternity. It's today that I'm worried about. How do I get through this? So there are seasons where the difficulties of today can be overwhelming to us, and eternity would be a relief. And yet we can find confidence in knowing that in the end, it's going to be okay. And there may be challenges and difficulties, and we can't minimize those. We have to walk through them, and they're real challenges that we're going to walk through. For some, big, for some, not so big, but they're real. And yet we can arrest our thinking, and we can do so by reminding ourselves of how God has sustained us in the past, or reminding ourselves to have an eternal perspective on things. In terms of eternity, what we're facing right now is a vapor. And in time it will pass, and in time we will be sustained. And so today, that's what I want to encourage you with, to think on the things that can help you navigate this situation. Let me read it again as we close. It says this: think on what is true and honorable, just and pure and lovely and commendable and excellent and worthy of praise. Think about those things today. God bless you. We'll see you back tonight for Pastor David, and then tomorrow morning. Have a great day.